Thank you for joining us for this session. This session is on rural connectivity, and it's a part of our terrestrial connectivity track, sponsored by Converge Business. Before we begin, I'd just like to thank all of our sponsors for their support of the event and helping to make this, whole week possible, so thank you all. We've got a great group of speakers with us today, including our moderator, David Strauss, who's a principal with Broadband Success Partners. I'll hand over to David in 1 second. There you go, David. I think I started too early. Over to you, David.
Everyone, thanks very much for joining us today. We're going to presume that you know why you're here, and that beyond the city, rural connectivity innovation. And rather than rattle off the description of this session, hopefully you've read it, on the app. Before our distinguished panel or panelists introduce themselves, I'd like to just briefly introduce myself. My name is David Strauss. Thrilled to be here to participate and to moderate this panel. I've marketed wireless and fiber services in the New York City area and beyond. I'm now co-founder of Broadband Success Partners. We support digital infrastructure investors and sellers with technical due diligence services. In fact, one of the businesses we evaluated is represented here today by Dan Davis on my left here, CEO and co-founder of Arcadian Infracom. And before they decided to invest in Arcadian last year, TIA hired us as their technical advisor. Enough about me. And now for our panelists, please introduce yourselves, indicating where your business fits within the ecosystem, and tell us why your perspective on this session topic will be helpful. So let's start first with you, Dan.
Sure, thank you, David. Dan Davis, CEO of Arcadian Infracom. So our business model is to build new long-haul, diverse fiber routes for basically two sets of customers, the hyperscale customers going data center to data center, looking for third, fourth, fifth diversity so that when other long-haul fiber routes get cut, it stays up. The other set of customers we have, which is relevant here, is for if you're going to build long-haul routes, you're going to build them diversely, which means not near existing long-haul fiber routes. You're going to bring that fiber backbone, which is the internet, closer to a bunch of markets that are currently far from the backbone. So the thesis here is, if you got market here, small. Look, I grew up in Pleasant Plains, Illinois, 654 people, right? Nearest backbone to that was about 100 and something miles away. Is it ever going to make sense to build 100 miles of fiber for 654 people? No. These two things need to come closer together to get good, affordable broadband to the small communities. So even my 9-year-old son can solve for this one. Can you move this? No. These things have to come closer together. What is your choice? Get the backbone closer to small markets. We're doing that for commercial reasons, for long-haul fiber diversity, but it was a realization in 2018 as we're putting this together that a natural outcome is to solve some of the rural and tribal broadband problem for the small communities along the new routes we're going to do. So that's our business. That's kind of how the perspective may be helpful here for David and the panel.
Great. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, David. Michael Ortiz, CEO of Layer 9 Data Centers. We are a hyperscale data center solutions provider specifically targeting Latin America. So when we talk about rural connectivity, we're really getting into the beginning innings of what is a 9-inning game in Latin America. For example, in the United States, we've got connectivity that's near 90%, but in Latin America, connectivity here is just breaking 68% in a market that's nearly 665 million residents. So what we're doing is we're helping, enabling, and bringing resources like Dan with fiber and bringing truly last mile connectivity to markets like Monterrey, Mexico, Mexico City, and interconnecting Latin America, which for Mexico City, right, let's put this in a perspective, Mexico City has 24.5 million people. The state of Florida is 22 million people. There are more people that live in a 25-mile radius in Mexico City than the third most populous state in the country. And that connectivity is only enhanced by a generation of younger residents in Mexico, Latin America, that are now gaming on devices, doing all the things that our daughters and sisters and brothers are doing and kids are doing. So for us, it's bringing that last mile connectivity, but bringing a hyperscale solution that market has just started to tap. You're starting to now see Microsoft and Google and Meta entering in Mexico, and we're bringing a solution that's going to enable that for that hyperscale client to move in quickly at 10, 15, 25 megawatt tranches.
Very good. Thanks, Michael. Dan?
All right, great. Thanks, David. My name's Dan Dooley. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of Link. So everything we've talked about in rural communications has always been on Earth. Think what you can do when you can connect cell towers from space. So we are building a constellation of low Earth orbit cell towers that connect directly to the mobile phone. So unlike a Starlink or a OneWeb, which are great solutions for backhaul, the terminal that they provide to you, our terminal is in your pocket. The phone in your pocket works with our satellite in orbit. So we're going directly to the handset from space. And if you think about it in that perspective, it totally changes the way that you can provide rural connectivity, no matter if you're in edge of suburbia or if you're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, you'll always have connectivity through cell towers in space.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Alan?
Hey, Alan Meeks, COO of Mox Networks. Mox is supporting Nantworks, which is a healthcare company working on curing disease with personalized evidence-based medicine through genomics, proteomics, sequencing, comparative analysis between healthy and cancerous tissue, and then they look for variants and create essentially immunotherapy vaccines. Cancer being the most difficult use case, that's where the billionaire doctor that we work for and owns us started with. So he's working on these challenges that require massive amounts of data. We run into the very similar problems that Facebook, Google, Amazon do, and needing to move a lot of data and sync that data across the globe and be able to compute and store it elastically. So the necessity for the basis of all that became fiber optics and new long haul routes. So very similar to what Dan's doing in building new fiber. That was sort of the impetus for us to start as a private telco for Dr. Patrick to build the network that could support the type of capacity that he was going to need in this endeavor. So much to Dan's point, we started to try to build diverse routes. The issues we found and why this became the impetus for Mox was all the long haul fiber, majority of the long haul fiber that goes more than 400 miles in North America is old. It's put most recent long haul builds contiguously, or maybe AT&T Next Gen in 06, or Wiltel in 03. Hasn't really been anything significant since then as a contiguous, clean long haul builds. So what we ran into is, okay, the DWDM systems that we're lighting, if you have high loss fiber, you can't get the new modulation schemes to work. So you can't get as much capacity as you're theoretically supposed to get per carrier wave. The solution to that was new fiber, low loss fiber. So we've been putting Dr. Pat's money in the ground relative to his healthcare space and the things that he's doing. And then we turn to the telco space adjacently and say, hey, we've got excess capacity, and we monetize it.
Great. Thanks, Alan. Roy?
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Let me be here. Yeah, SES, we are one of the largest satellite companies in the world. The unique situation is we have multi-orbit opportunities and to base off both the MEO standard and also traditional GEO constellations. And for us, our main view is to really help telcos, MNOs expand their footprint, as well as clients to really reach applications out into all sorts of areas of the world. For our play here, we have the traditional situation where we're able to reach hundreds of sites in a rural situation very easily through classic GEO satellite. But more importantly, our new next generation coming through in our MEO platform, now we can be an aggregation point to extend mobile networks out, or even do beyond that with larger capacity. So it's really bringing forth new generation opportunities from the sky. And obviously for this discussion, it's faster and sometimes easier compared to traditional fiber build.
Great. Thank you, Roy. So there you have it. Pretty exciting, very diverse panel with, I'm sure, very different points of view, hopefully not too conflicting, but let's get into it. So to start our conversation about connecting the unserved and underserved areas and populations of the world, let's begin with the word density. The level of geographic concentration of homes and businesses is obviously a key factor in deciding which technology or technologies to utilize and deploy. Should you start with fixed wireless, fiber, satellite, to connect a rural population, or I'll say a less dense population, to the internet? Let's hear from each of you as to your point of view on that.
Yeah, as you mentioned, all telecom economics work off user density. So if you could build a mile of fiber in Manhattan and get tens of thousands of customers, that mile of fiber is going to perform better economically. If you're building in a Pleasant Plains, Illinois, and you might be able to touch 4 farmhouses, it's a little bit more difficult. So I don't know that it's a binary decision of fiber versus wireless versus satellite. I think we have to have all these technologies in our tool belt. At the end of the day, the backbone's right now always going to be fiber because that's the most effective, scaled, cost-effective, scaled way to move fiber around the planet. As you get closer to the end user, then you have some choices. How far down to the end user does that fiber go? I live in the urban core of St. Louis, right? And so in my neighborhood, we have fiber. Pleasant Plains, Illinois, with a farmhouse every 4 miles, it's unlikely fiber's ever going to make sense. So you bring fiber to the small community, and then you have some choices. You can, fixed wireless, 5G. So I don't know that it's a binary choice. I think it's an economic choice for the business. And how deep do you go with fiber? At the core is always going to be fiber, but then you have choices after that as you get closer to the end user.
Fair enough. Thanks.
You know what I find interesting is that it's not necessarily about bringing it to the last mile, but to Dan's point, it's cost, right? Yeah. It's a hybrid. For example, there's about 3 billion people in the world who don't have access to broadband, right? But what I thought was interesting was that even though you got 3 billion people who don't have access to broadband, over half of them couldn't afford it even if it was delivered to them. So for example, in the United States, average cost of a data plan for the United States citizens is about 2 to 2.5% of your GDP per month, right? About $100, $125 a month. Would you know in Africa it's 40%? Would you know in Latin America it's 10%? So there's a grand disparity in being able to access information. For example, in Mexico, 145 million residents. 67% of the population is connected to the internet. However, that cost of that connection point only recently has come down. And as a result of that cost coming down, that's why that market is the fastest growing market in the world. Case in point, Mexico, Brazil, the 2 biggest markets. They account for over half of the subscribers in Latin America, 665 million residents. If you take them apart and you look at where the spending's at, even though Brazil is 240 million people and Mexico is about 140 million, the average spend on the internet for a Mexican resident is almost $700. In Brazil, it's $385. Right. Big difference, right, in spend. And this is all about the cost of data per gigabyte, right? So it comes down to Dan's point, whether it's fixed, whether it's wireless, whether it's satellite, comes down to economics. How much does it take me to bring that last mile to you? Because if you're in America, it's not that challenging. But if you live in Mexico, you have to traverse a mountain ranges to get last delivery. You may not have that opportunity to do that with a hard line.
Fair enough.
I'll butt right into that. That's where space comes into play. So you don't have to put a fiber through a mountain. You just beam it right down onto it. And if you think about it, rural is really relative to your point, which is, there's some rural connectivity that makes economic sense for someone to put a fiber or put a piece of gear. Even in some really, really rural place, it's economic sense to put in a $1,000 antenna to have a Starlink, right, reception for your business. But if you're really rural, or you're by yourself, or you're in a place that the cost of what they can afford is $2, $3, you really need to think about it differently. And the way to think about it is if you could get, access from a different, sphere, if you will, directly to the handset, that's kind of the solution because, the satellites are traveling, in LEO constellation, orbiting the Earth. It's covering every spot on the globe. And so it's not the incremental cost of putting down a beam in Mount Fuji in, Japan is not that much more than putting it down in Montana. So it is really an economics, and I do think that there's room for all different types of solutions depending on where you are across the globe.
Yeah, I would agree that it's not a binary choice, and what's previously been said, it's all of these things together that are going to solve the problem. I think when I think about rural broadband and getting to the hard-to-reach places, I think about it in terms of rural hospitals. The best use case for what we're doing is actually the smaller size hospitals, 150 beds and under, which are mostly rural. So I think it's more about aligning. So when I think about, just back up for a minute with the rural hospital, if you want to start moving sequencing closer and closer to the edge, so to speak, you're going to hit a critical mass even in rural areas with hospitals because there's so much data in healthcare. I think for people's handsets and getting basic broadband, LEO solutions, that's a great way to get started in rural areas, fixed wireless. But at some point, maybe not in that space, but definitely in the healthcare space, we're going to hit a critical mass almost immediately. So I think it's more about a critical mass that would not be supported by fixed wireless or LEO. This is latency and capacity issues. So I think it's more about aligning the priorities. Long haul right now, new long haul needing to be built is really so you can get from a subsea landing station to a data center, let's say, and that's who's paying for it. But these are the new railroads that are being built, and they're getting built through areas that they're not putting stops on them. I mean, there's some solutions to rural broadband that I think could be a lot quicker brought to market. For example, some of the ILEC assets out there, AT&T has, 8 ducts between Minneapolis and Seattle, goes through that northern tier. They're not the ILEC in any of those territories. They don't break out, they don't service anybody. They got one duct full of fiber and the others are sitting there empty. And we're throwing all this money to try to build new stuff when you could repull assets like that if there was an opportunity to do so. And I think, and then that sort of solves two things with one effort, as an example, is new long haul, and you can create new stops for these rural areas and onboard the hospitals. So it's a combination, it's not a binary choice, it's a combination of all these things, but it's about aligning the incentive structure for doing these new long haul builds to service not just the FANGs of the world that need to connect from the subsea to the data center, but all those people in the rural areas in between.
Very good. Thanks, Alan.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I'll actually dovetail off of that because I think where you're going to get into a situation where there is not one solution. Dan's perfectly correct. Obviously we can point beams down to anywhere in the world and it makes it easier. I think it's going to be a situation that you're going to look to how do you build out a public-private partnership in some of these situations. We can certainly look at a traditional satellite scenario and bring down a certain amount of capacity. We've got a new satellite over the Americas. It's perfectly positioned to handle that through government agencies and schools and things of that nature. But that's only one part of it. In the multi-orbit world, what we're doing in our new services with MEO, now you've got a situation where you can partner with MNOs to maybe expand that fixed wireless out there or that mobile out there through an aggregation point. But I would even go one further to your point about the hospitals. So what about a hospital that may need something that we can now deliver fiber-like quality service with all the same thing that they're looking at. It's not virtually a fiber replacement, and now that can be its own hub, and can that then begin to broadcast out and serve that region beyond just that hospital? Can that hospital be a beacon in that rural area? And so that's where I start seeing this evolution where it's going to be all of the above. The duct example is perfect. There's a duct is there, so same example. If you're putting a bunch of capacity down to a agricultural site or a mine or other something like that, what else could we do to serve that and expand it out? And I think that's going to be some private partnerships and other scenarios where we're going to see that build out that could change the game in terms of how do you speed, in terms of speed, because the biggest problem is how do you get fiber out there faster?
Very good, thanks, Rob. So just want to remind you, as you can see up on the screen there, if you have any questions, please take a shot of that and send it in. Be happy to answer any questions you might have. So we've established it's not binary. The economics make a big difference, as do specific use cases. So from both a commercial perspective as well as from a consumer perspective, as you look at the different use cases and you look at the last mile, what are some of the advantages and perhaps some of the limitations of the different technologies, if we can talk about that briefly.
When you've got low user density, I think you've got, the wireless is usually the entry point. So we work with a lot of American Indian tribes here in the United States, 5 or 6 right now. Navajo Nation is the first we were working with. And you got it's much what Michael was talking about here, where you have a very low density issue, but on top of that, you've got a core economic activity issue, right? There's just not a lot of spendable dollars by the end users within the tribal reservation areas. For example, Navajo Nation, I think average household income, this is pre-COVID, was under $11,000 a year average household income. 30% of the homes don't have electricity, 40% don't have water. So when you have people that don't have disposable income and don't even have electricity in their home, how do you get them broadband? And that's right here in the larger United States. So I think you've got to really look at different business models, public-private partnerships at the deepest level. As most people here, there's $65 billion or so of federal money, probably $100 billion when you include state money that's about to get dumped into the system, right, to help solve this problem. Because economically, low user density, inability to pay what it would cost to deliver that service, somebody has to step in, and there's certainly an argument to be made that that's a good use of governmental funds to try to close that gap that just can't get closed on a commercial basis. I'd say as we think about kind of other potential business models, and actually look at the folks on this stage. We went through a capital raise not too long ago, and we had an opportunity to talk to infrastructure investors who were looking at investing in digital infrastructure fiber data centers for the first time. I see a lot of familiar faces out there. A lot of us have been at this 20 and 30 years, right? The way we think about the industry, it's when you got to step back and be objective. We all do our very narrow thing. I'm long-haul fiber. I'm satellite. I'm fiber to the home. We don't realize how very narrow each of our businesses are. My point is, when you look at solving this problem, I can't solve it. Fiber to the home folks can't solve it because they don't have what I need. Mm-hmm. There's areas that none of us can solve it that satellite has to need. And I kind of point the finger back to us as an industry, not just from a funding perspective. How do we all work better together as far as kind of solving the larger
Great point. Yeah.
One thing I'll talk about is latency. Yep. Latency is a really critical part of as to whether you're using wireless or fiber. There's a reason why the New York Stock Exchange sits in Battery Park and why the exchanges have to have a latency loop of 15 miles or less. The cost of parking all that data in Secaucus is not really advantageous. New Jersey utility rates are expensive, far more expensive than if you were to park that data, say, 30 miles away here in Ashburn, where the cost of power is 6.5, 7 cents a kilowatt, right? Whereas in New Jersey, it's 40% more expensive. But that round trip loop is one in which you cannot have latency in it because you have to have that data be able to be processed immediately without anything. Another case in point, Burbank, California. Within that 15 little mile radius of Burbank, California lies almost 200 production studios, for which they generate data in the teraflops per day. Those groups don't have the ability always to long haul back to Nevada or Arizona, right? And in Arizona, the cost of power is 6.5 cents a kilowatt. In Southern California Edison, it's 18 cents a kilowatt. Not to mention the cost of building a data center in California with seismic bracing, CEQA, is almost $12 million a megawatt, whereas you can build that same data center in Ashburn for 7, build it in Phoenix for 7, build it in Nevada for 6.5. So my point to this is that where you park that data and the latency of it also oftentimes determines the pathway in which you can use. You can't use microwave, you can't use wireless when Disney's making Wreck-It Ralph 3, right? And they're generating 300,000 core compute usage. Wreck-It Ralph 1, if you guys, any of you have kids, Wreck-It Ralph 1 was 65,000 core count usage. Wreck-It Ralph 2 was 260,000. Wreck-It Ralph 3 is being in production now in 8K, 400,000 core nodes. You cannot send that through a wireless signal or a microwave burst. You got to send that through the pipe. It's got to go through one Wilshire. It's got to go up to ILM, back. It's expensive.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk about rural communications, for a satellite direct to handset, obviously speed. I can put a beam down, I can take a beam up. If a mobile network operator gives me a lat long, we can put a cell tower anywhere on the earth, right? If you talk about ubiquity, certainly you have it. You could get it in the middle of the ocean, you could get it in the middle of a mountain, anywhere you want. The biggest downfall is capacity, right? I mean, these are small satellites. We have a 1 meter by 1 meter satellite. It's not that big, so you need a lot of satellites. We have an ITU filing that we are going to launch 5,100 satellites. But even with that, that's enough capacity. But if you're talking about stock exchange or you're talking about more urban type of things, that's where you really need fiber. But if you're talking about rural connectivity, I mean really rural connectivity, being able to get to any 3GPP device directly from a satellite, is really a amazing technology.
Yeah, I would piggyback a little bit on the latency topic. I think companies out there that are dealing with the size of data that we're dealing with in healthcare, the need to, again, elastically store and compute that, we're headed towards the next generation network, which is a truly distributed compute and storage network. And the way that could look is in new long-haul route construction, all of your AMP sites can become small compute and storage nodes and also on and off ramps. Again, solving multiple problems by doing the same thing. And so these are the types of networks we need to build to support the healthcare compute and storage that we're doing. But at the same time, if you can create all of those AMP sites to be small compute and storage nodes and on and off ramps for access to cloud, access to peering points and things like this, you've essentially kind of solved that edge problem to some extent, right? Now you can build from all those AMP nodes to the edge a lot easier. So I think that's kind of one thing that ties into the rural. The other piece of it, though, is like what Dan is mentioning is the financing. So the applications for these truly distributed compute and storage networks and people that want to build this fiber is very technical and is up the stack in the data world. And so finance people tend to look at what we're doing in construction as like, well, you're a tech company, right? And it's not the case. We're more like a utility when we're putting fiber in the ground. We don't want to be regulated like a utility, but we want to be financed like a utility. Social infrastructure, not your 36 to 60-month Wall Street cycles of money. This is where we found good partnerships in First Nations. They have 50-year visions. They have access to low-cost debt markets. They want to basically invest in their communities to be able to, get them on the tour, not just solve the rural broadband and rural telehealth issues, but get themselves on the tour lists of the digital supply chain economies that are near them in the metro areas. And having fiber to their community puts them on that tour list, can help increase their tax base. This is, I think, so that's kind of how, the problem could be solved. It's got to be a rethinking of financing. It can't be one-to-one customer relationships to go build these big networks. It's got to be layered social investment.
Absolutely, and I'll jump off the layered point of view right off the bat because I think that's going to be the scenario when you look at how do you build this through, and I'll capture a couple of these in this as well. So we do a lot of mobile backhaul through typical geo satellite. That's it's certainly kind of a round one. That's something that you could do to help aggregate sites. Obviously, you can do direct satellite to a house, which would be fantastic to be able to start to build that out. Well, you can kind of send that through that layers of evolution. The next up, you could bring it into an aggregation site, hit it with what we're talking about, in terms of our next generation 3BM power satellite. Now you've got an aggregation site there, and you're moving up the level as you're bringing things out. And that technology that goes up not only helps connect, but it also doesn't doom the rural folks to be forever not technology driven or lag behind, because now you're bringing the best to them and work through that. And I think there is technology shifts, but you're going to have to don't look at one or the other. It's how can we build a narrative around what makes sense. And perhaps there's a leading indicator with you start with the easiest, fastest, like a geo solution with satellite. If there's a market there and you get that through, then you can build into the fiber and you build your way up. We're doing 5G tests, for example, out in the more rural areas of cities, supporting through that as evolution. That would be the kind of the other end of that. And I'll go one more on the technology side. We're a little bit to the movie. Obviously, you're running huge data through, but we're also finding that in our new services, folks on movie sets are actually using it from remote sites and beaming the dailies up and down into sites, and they're able to do that now because of latency and, more importantly, the bandwidth that you're able to offer. And so that's going to be a big change. So as that bandwidth goes up into the gigabits, and with that fiber-like scenario, now you are truly able to do anything. So I think there's going to be a dramatic evolution. If the idea is how do we all layer it together to be smart? And financially, that's the accountants and everyone has to figure out that way. But it's more of a stepstone. It's not got to do this and hope it proves in. Can we start somewhere? Can we build a business case and move through up, and at the same time move them up the technology narrative as well? So it's a win-win.
Great. Thank you, Roy. So we have a few questions. I'm going to actually start with the last one first, since Dan Dooley can sort of answer that in a few seconds. Is Link connecting a rural cell phone tower to their satellite, or is it from satellite directly to the handset?
Yeah, so it's we've replicated the software stack of a cell tower and put the base station on a satellite. So it's truly a cell tower in orbit. And you had to solve two things. Doppler compensation, because it's moving so darn fast, 7.7 kilometers a second. So there's lots of negative and positive Doppler shift. I'm not techie, but it's hard to do. We've got the patents for that.
This is hard.
And then you've got to solve the fact that the cell tower, this phone wants to find a tower that's 35 kilometers away or 100 kilometers away. It doesn't want to find something that's 500 kilometers in the air. And so the extended time range is a problem. So we have the patents for that. And we put a cell tower on a little pizza box satellite, and it's flying, and it's connecting, the device in your pocket. Okay. Capacity, is the issue.
Yeah.
And you have to have a lot of them so that they're close enough that you can put them together so your phone call, your call can be extended. But,
Right.
it's stuff that did not believe it was possible technically a couple of years ago.
Great. Thanks, Dan. So, love this question. Even if connectivity is provided with the technology mix, what about the quality of the end user services? Are rural areas doomed to forever be lagging behind? And I think, Dan, as you alluded to the $65 billion, there's an element of government funding, municipality funding that hopefully will not cause them to lag. But I'd love to hear your perspective and that of the others.
So on the end users, it's actually, I had this discussion with somebody at breakfast this morning. As we're working with very small rural communities and tribal communities, we're working with one tribe on a grant application for a federal grant to build it out, and there's about 1,500 or 1,600 users in the entire reservation. Times $30, $50 a month, do the quick math. That's not a lot of income to work with. Even if you build the network, whatever, $25, $35 million to build fiber to everything on the reservation, these things, as we all know, cost hundreds of thousands, probably millions a year to maintain. There is no funding component at the federal or state level for that. You've got to fall back to a commercial model to solve that problem. We've looked at, models with the tribes and rural communities. With 1,500 to 2,000 users, anything short of probably 10,000 users, very hard to build a commercial model to say, look, we've got a company serving 1,600 users, and all the finance and legal and regulatory, and for 1,600 users, that business model isn't going to make sense. Which means if you do it, it's going to be such a skinny team, end user services are going to be awful.
Right.
I think we need to think about, an aggregation of very small, an operating company to do work across multiple of these small rural communities, so they can share that high fixed cost of operations, like a provisioning team can do dozens of these communities. You don't need a provisioning team for everyone. So I think the contributor of the question is right. There's not going to be, the business is going to consume cash, not ooze cash, which is a bad thing from a equity or a debt provider perspective. You've got, I think, get to a point of scale across very small communities. Otherwise, your choices are it's going to consume cash until the business, hits a wall and stops. And during that time, you're going to have really poor quality end user services. Even though you might have great connectivity, when it goes down, it takes a day or two to come back up because you got to roll somebody from hundreds of miles away. It's a very insightful question. It's an operating cost question for really low user density rural markets, and there isn't an answer right now.
Anyone else want to take that?
I wouldn't say that people in rural areas are doomed. There's a reason why data centers are being built in Altoona, Iowa, why they're being built in Dallas, Texas, right? There's an immense shortfall of data centers throughout not only the United States, but globally, right? And as much as, you think that on the outskirts of Iowa, that why would there be a Microsoft data center, or in Fort Collins near Montana, you have a major Microsoft deployment. It's all about interconnecting edge and hub, right? They peacefully coexist. There's reasons to have them at last mile, and there's reasons to have data centers and hubs. There are data centers all throughout the United States, Latin America, where you'll have a presence, for example, in Mexico City. You're not going to be able to build a data center the size that you see out here in Ashburn in Mexico City because there's just no land.
Yeah,
right? If you want to buy land in LA, you're going to pay $140 to $160 a square foot to buy dirt. When I worked at DuPont Fabros, we were buying land at its peak at $18 to $20 a foot, and now I'm hearing that price has now skyrocketed to $45 a foot. There will always be a need to connect last mile, but also you need to have that edge and hub. So I wouldn't say that rural is doomed. It's coming to you. You just got to be patient. Either that or you just move, right?
Okay. I don't know if there are any other responses, but we can go on to the next question unless, Alan, you had something to say?
Yeah, just to that last point, I think there might be a lot more hope in coming years for rural areas where large-scale, cheap power generation can happen.
Very good point.
Because then you've got potential for data centers and fiber builds, and then you can create the new railways to make the off-ramps to these rural communities and serve them. But yeah, I think you're always going to be up against the consumption rates and Moore's Law, and it just going up and up and up, and not being able to get connectivity out fast enough to everybody. Probably always going to be suffering some version of that into the future.
Okay.
It's a great point, though. You want to, again, can you piggyback on another project? Is there something else going on in that area that's going to generate some form of a scenario that you can then jump on and put connectivity in play at the same time?
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like in Montana, the Talon Energy is looking at Colstrip, Montana, turn this old, 150-year-old coal mine massive, and they've got 500 megawatts of generation there. But what also is there is power transmission,
Right.
and railways to bring in stuff. So it's
There you
kind of
go.
they're looking at conversion and using wind and solar in those areas to convert the coal plant and create energy out in the middle of Montana.
Okay. So this next question might be a softball for the satellite gentlemen on this panel, but how would you solve an issue of having good, continuous, high-capacity, high-speed connection in hard-to-reach areas such as mountain zones? Eternal frost. I actually love that expression because I didn't know there was such a thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, how would you address that?
Dan put it perfectly. We can put a beam anywhere. So it's absolutely. So in a scenario, when you look at that, there is no part of the world that we can't touch. Then it becomes down to what's the application you need and what demands do you need to have it there. So yeah, we don't look at in a situation that there's a location that we can or can't serve. I mean, what we're looking at now, and when you look at, in particularly when you look at a MEO-based solution where you've got large bandwidth, you've got latency that's down and comparable to fiber, and now you've got MEF certification, jitters, class of service, all that type of stuff. There's nothing we can't deliver. So then it really takes the location out of play. Now the question becomes, what application do you need and where do you need it? And so now and that's the conversations we're having with with anywhere from a rig to a mine site to an architectural situation or an agricultural situation. What do you need? You need that there. You need an edge device. You need a cloud compute situation. We're doing a lot of work with first responders in that space. You think there's a lot going on in the country right now. When you're talking about U.S., when you think of firefighters, things of that nature, there's a lot of applications where you're trying to make sure that you know where those firefighters are and where they need to be. Those applications need to be supported. We can do that at a level not only from a location, but now you're starting to talk real video, real-time tracking, things of that nature. So we can do it in those situations. We can do it about anywhere. So that's the beauty.
Right.
It's an Ethernet fiber from the sky. We just drop it down. Just tell us where you want it to go.
Fiber from the sky. Okay. If you want to believe that. No, I'm just kidding. So
he's connecting cell phones. I mean, that's so cool.
There you go.
You got to give us fiber if he's doing the great things.
It's
with
a
the phone.
big difference between fiber and connecting a cell phone. Right. But it all. And again, we started with the whole panel saying rural is a spectrum. Right. And there's going to be places that's rural, like Loudoun County, is that rural or is that not rural? I mean, you know what I mean? Like, but then there's rural, right?
Yeah,
and there's
right.
mountaintops
Great
and
point.
there's forests. And, if you ever get lost in a mountain, you hope you have a link at that point because we're going to be the only one that's going to get directly to that
Exactly.
phone in your pocket. So
Exactly.
now, can you stream your Netflix? Not right now, okay? But, you need a lot of them.
You can phone a friend for help, right?
Yeah.
Okay. There were a couple of questions that I'm going to combine here. One references supply chain hell, which some of us are more familiar, I guess, than others. And there was another question about finding the right talent. So when it comes to resources, and certain shortages and certain companies are forward buying, and then finding the right talent to deploy those resources and build and construct, what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I think a number of us can talk to the supply chain issue. I really want to speak to the talent issue. So, as I say, I see a lot of folks out there I know. Many of us are balding and graying and been in this for 20, 30 years, right? We're now entering in the next 5, 10 years a time where there's going to be a lot of capital and a lot of networks deployed. Who picks up the ball and runs it for the next 10 or 15 years? We have done, I think, as an industry, not a great job of making this area attractive to the 20-somethings, right? How do we, as an industry, and I talk to other CEOs about this all the time, the real shortage is a talent shortage, whether it's folks to do the fiber construction, but the people to run the companies, right? We are going to age out as a group, the former leaders who are maybe on our second or third rodeo here. That's the bigger talent shortage I see. How do we make this space, telecom, digital infrastructure, how do we make this attractive to the next generation, the generation after that, to devote their lives to? As most of us know, once you get bit by the telecom bug, it's pretty hard to recover from that. You're in it for the rest of your life, as many of us are. But we're going to run out of talent of people to train experientially as leaders to take, to spend the next 65 or $100 billion, or once it's built in 5 years, operate it for the next 15 years. That's the talent question I worry about.
Yeah, supply chain, I'm going to break that one in half because we got supply chain and we got skill sets. Absolutely, we're lacking in skill sets, and quite frankly, we're lacking in interest. I attended recently a crypto mining conference in Miami, where the average age of that attendee was about 23 years old. I come here, it's about double that, right? We have a major disparity in terms of raising that next generation because it's not sexy, it's not shiny, it's not, how am I going to make a quick buck, right? I've got kids that all they can think about is like the end of the world for them is why my Netflix isn't working. And yet they don't put it into perspective that, with all that came an abundance of work and an ecosystem to build that, right? And that takes talent and experience. On the supply chain, building in Mexico is anything but normal, right? We're building a project that's going to be one of the largest data centers in all of Latin America. Over 400,000 square feet in one building. And we're facing concrete, steel, aluminum, I could tell you that what we rely upon greatly is relationships. And I'll tell you that relationships are what's going to get us through the supply chain, because your friends will figure out ways to create solutions for you. If you don't have those relationships, or if you played, the I game ball, you're going to be waiting 60 weeks for PDUs, 55 weeks for transformers. The relationships that us and others have fostered are going to help get us through that. The chips thing, I'll address it very simply. Think about when you've been at an airport and you see an airport expansion. You ever notice how the construction company brings the concrete supply chain to the site? The airport itself has now a manufacturer that's creating concrete on-prem. That's going to be no different with us, right? You're going to have chipset makers coming to markets, as opposed to Intel saying, we build chipsets in Phoenix, Arizona, so you got to go source them. Or what I'm going to see a big difference is you're going to see a major influx, my prediction, of manufacturing of semiconductors back in the United States, because the long supply chains with Taiwan Semiconductor and others, 60 weeks, 75 weeks. I mean, walk to a car dealership and see how many new cars they have left. It's like something happened like out of movies of like a zombies. It's like they got 6 cars, right? And they're selling those cars at 10,000 over list. It's ridiculous. The bottom line is supply chain for us in our world is about relationships and being able to multi-source from different markets, being able to build pre-manufactured in one market, deliver into another market, being able to use the resources that you have inside of a market where you don't have to outsource everything. You can take a hybrid approach, build in Arizona, ship it here, bring the concrete in from another market, bring it here. It's a balance, but I think we'll get through it.
So here's a good one. So we're all in supply chain hell, right? You know who's not in supply chain hell? Access to space. Elon is putting up rockets. I think he put up, like 8 rockets in the last 14 days. I mean, they're going up to space almost every day. He's doing a Falcon 9 launch every week. So, yeah, the rest of us are in supply chain hell. But if you want to get something up in the air, he'll have something pretty quickly that you can get up there. It's actually amazing.
Agreed.
Yeah, supply chain. So where I'm at in the space of putting fiber in the ground, probably the largest line item we spend cash on is fiber cable itself. We've solved that this year. Well, I wouldn't say solved, but we've mitigated that this year by not going to the normal guys. The big American manufacturers who we had historically worked with. We started looking around the globe and finding other people in other areas that had glass furnaces that were making their own glass, and we went to South Korea and met them and went to their, visited their facilities, saw their furnaces, brought our OSP guys out to test their fiber. And we found that it's very much to your point about relationships, that creating those relationships and taking the time to go find something else as opposed to just getting in line and placing your order really has paid off for us quite a bit this year. I agree wholeheartedly with Dan's sentiment about the talent, especially at the leadership level, I think is few and far between. It's getting harder and harder to find folks to run companies with money to spend that know what they're doing at least in the construction space where I'm at. I would agree with both of those things. Then the other side of the supply chain again is for us is DWDM equipment, and I don't know if there's really any solution to this, as the globe just has to untangle this global just-in-time economy and sort of rejigger it so that we can make more things locally. And I don't know until that happens if supply chain just is relieved one day. I think it's an issue we may be faced with for a while.
I'll just echo the comment about relationships. We've had a bunch of satellites that are being manufactured and then sent up into the air, and it's taken a lot of work to get that on and keep them on schedule. And it's been because of the relationships. A little different. We've at SES we've really focused on trying to bring in more of that young talent. I don't know if it's because space is cool again or it always has been cool. It's really hard. Dan put it perfectly. It's really hard. But yeah, we've done that. So I think we're solving a lot of that part of it from a workforce point of view. So which is encouraging and exciting. It keeps us all our old telco guys. It keeps us on our toes with having the new kids coming in. So.
Great, thank you. This is an interesting question and sort of a business challenge that I've heard about for many years within the cable sector, but I guess is an expression that applies obviously more broadly to, would you consider a build it and they will come approach? I guess that's from Field of Dreams, something like that, to serve rural areas rather than chasing density.
Essentially, it's back to the financial question, right? Everybody would love to, at least in my space, start construction of a long haul route when, 100% of the capacity is leased up before you put a dollar in the ground. That situation does not exist out there, right? So the question is, how far ahead do you need to start spending money in advance of demand? I'd say there's two reasons for hope here. One is the emergence of infrastructure investors, as opposed to shorter-term venture capital or medium-term private equity. Infrastructure investors seem to have a longer-term view of returns, right? So, more tolerance for when big dollars go on the ground and when they hit their return of capital. So you do see infrastructure investors coming into this space. Basically the infrastructure funds have, their limited partners are pensions, sovereign wealth funds, large family offices, people who are, more interested in preservation of the principal, not having something going to zero. As a result, they'll take lower returns, but they'll also look farther out for returns generally. So that there's reason for hope that we can get a little bit, move a little farther out the risk curve as far as time goes. The other is, and has been mentioned a couple of times, is the emergence of the public sector, the 65 to 100 billion dollars coming in to help with the business cases and close that gap between, if you need this much dollars to get a route off the ground and the commercial demand, private sector money can only take it this far, can you close enough of that gap with public money? So essentially, so I think the emergence of kind of infrastructure investors with a longer term view and more public sector funding will help with that and help us lead the demand curve more than we are now.
Fair enough.
Makes sense.
If you build it, they will come. That's a hard one because if I talk to my bankers, going spec on a project, not really.
Right.
Bankers don't like when you can't pay the debt service on a note. So I would like to think that most people entering a market qualify a market by its demand funnel, right? Accessibility to infrastructure, power, water, fiber. What's the cost to bring it last mile for me, right? Even though I can get cheap power, I may be in a situation like Ashburn, Virginia, where even though I'm paying Dominion 6.5 cents a kilowatt, I've got to now go to Leesburg, Manassas, Prince William County to be able to go find land that isn't $40 a foot. I may have to go chase the outskirts, right? It has to economically make sense because what you can't control is your money supply, right? The market dictates that to you based on your credit quality, your risk profile. Also, you can't dictate market rents, right? In just a short 2 years ago, leases here cratered for a 5 megawatt lease. And they were in the 70s, but because of supply chains actually helped the market rebound because not everyone can build. And because of it, now those megawatt data center leases that you're seeing getting leased or signed are back up in the 80s and 90s. Look, it's got to make economic sense, right? I would love to build in the rural areas of the Congo, but my bankers are not like, listen, where's the demand? The demand is where you're going to be building. So for us, we chase density unless a customer tells us, listen, I want you to build me a node 300 miles away, and I'll take you there. And then there's instances like that where we are considering Latin American markets where no one's putting a flag down. Costa Rica, 96% of that energy source is hydro and geothermal. It's cheap, 5.5 cents, but it's far, right? You're not going to drop a spec project in Costa Rica unless you have a customer taking you to that marketplace.
Okay, fair enough. Any other perspectives?
Yeah, I mean, if you build it, they will come. That is the model post telecom divestiture through about 2001, 2002 that tanked a lot of legacy telcos. It doesn't mean that it can't work, but it's got to be, you've got to build something very strategic knowing, which really requires some foresight. So, I mean, I'm out there building routes that, you know, our parent company's gotten to a critical mass on. We can't lease circuits anymore. It makes more sense to capitalize and depreciate the asset and own it. I think there's, like, the demand for people that need to do that is coming from Facebook, Amazon, Google for the most part. And so if you could build, they're not really building in any meaningful way. So they're still sort of pressuring the carriers lower and lower as much as they can. So if you had some foresight, you know, in what those guys need, what routes they need, and you could build it before they do, that could be a model that could work. But again, you're stuck with the finance question of how do you get somebody to finance it before you would have a contract signed. And because of that terrible model in, you know, the early 2000s, late 90s, it's caused a lot of reticence in the finance side of things to want to build fiber. So there's that part, and then I think as well, you know, if you think about fiber and as a utility, we're really this like bastard child utility. We don't have our own right-of-ways. We piggyback on gas and we piggyback on power and rails, and we always play second fiddle to those right-of-ways in terms of, you know, priority. You know, you could have an approved run line with a rail and where you can build your fiber, but then you get out in the field and the supervising contractors will issue change order after change order and push you further and further to the edge of the right-of-way, increasing your costs. And you maybe predicted to go through 15% rock, but after they got through all their change orders because of safety on the rail, 35% was rock, and your cost went up 10 million. So those are the risks in that. The way to mitigate that piece of it, which in my mind is the biggest risk of building it in Milcom, is having some advantage at that right-of-way level. You know, being able to work telcos to work in conjunction with, say, gas pipelines again in meaningful ways. Stuff hasn't happened for 20 years, and that's why all the fiber's old.
Just real quick, I mean, for us, we do have a bit of a build it and they will come, because we're talking, you know, and you look at our traditional geo satellites, you're talking hemispheres, right? You're talking, you know, entire view. So, you know, obviously you have some lead customers that you've got in there, but you do have a bit of a build it and you will come, and that's why some of that will help, you know, aggregate for the rural side. So we're not a single route when we put one up. Now, there's a leap of faith as you're putting that up there. You know, but you know, at least you have a lot of folks you can make a phone call to, or a lot of regions you can look at. So we do have a little bit more of a build-in they will come that we could support.
Okay. Thank you. We have about 2 minutes remaining. Just to piggyback on the build it and they will come. In our prep session, we talked a bit about the role of economic development, and so I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that. That's an important, or for some, an important part of the equation.
Just briefly, you know, as I said, we work with a lot of very rural communities and tribal communities who are, you know, especially tribal communities, not been really participants in larger economic activity outside of their borders. So we're trying to leapfrog them ahead from decades of underinvestment in the infrastructure. If you're building basically from zero from an economic development perspective, the future, if you don't have connectivity and ability to participate in the digital economy, I don't know how you're going to be successful from an economic development perspective. Right. So that connectivity question, whether it's fiber or satellite or fixed wireless, doesn't matter, but I just say, without connectivity, I don't know how you can have sustainable economic development.
Fair enough.
Yep.
Think about connectivity back in the 1700s when the railroad was being built. Those towns that elected to have the railroads spliced through their towns thrived.
That's right.
And those who didn't were gone, right? So economic development, well, we look at it from the perspective of, you know, there's over 35 states that now have economic incentives specific to data centers. Many say these things are using water, they don't create jobs. That's actually not true. I would encourage you all to read a report that was issued by the Northern Virginia Technology Council that talked about the economic benefit of data centers. Yep. Data centers in Northern Virginia generate enough revenue to pay for K through 5th grade education, all of EMS, fire, and rescue for all of Loudoun County. And the amount of jobs that are created may not be large, but the average salary of a data center employees is almost 1.5 times the state average, 85 to 95,000. They're great paying jobs, and it's not just the direct, it's the induced and the tertiary impact that data centers create. So, and when I think of an economic development play, I always try to position this to decision makers. Listen, for every dollar that you give me, I'm going to give you 3 back, right? You may not see it today, you may not see it tomorrow, but over a long course of 10, 15 years, that benefit is going to absolutely be paying you dividends on the long term.
Great, thanks, Michael. So we are now over time, so we're going to have to cut it off here, but I want to thank this great panel and the audience for those wonderful questions. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, David, for moderating. That was a great session. I really enjoyed that one. So thank you, everyone. We're going to kick the next session off pretty much immediately. So if you guys want to run away, I think the others are just outside, so we'll be kicking off in a second.